Far Cry 5 was developed and published by Capcom. And this game came out, I believe, 2 years ago. And I actually bought this game last year, but I quickly lost interest in playing it simply because the experience was too similar to what I had already played with Far Cry 4, which is, before this game, the only Far Cry game I've ever played. For the longest time, for well over a year, I had no interest to play this game. It was just sitting on my shelf, being unplayed, and every time I tried to get into it, I couldn't. I would install the game and just play a few minutes, and after that, I would just, close out the game and go on to do something else with my time. Recently, somehow, for whatever reason, I don't know, I gained the interest to actually continue playing the game, and I played through the rest of the game from where I had left off. And for the most part, there's been some improvements between this game and Far Cry 4. The biggest improvement is the fact that Ubisoft removed two things that were extremely annoying. One of these things they actually do with every single one of their open world games. And Far Cry 5 is the first game that they've done to really get rid of this trope that you find in Ubisoft open world games and a lot of other open world games too, including games such as Spider-Man and Horizon Zero Dawn. And that's the fact of the game forcing the player to go unlock these towers so you as the player can see the open world map, which makes navigation easier, and so you can actually get to the actual in-game objectives. And so that's a big change, huge improvement that Far Cry 5 makes. Another improvement is the fact that they've gotten rid of pretty much all of the collectathon bullshit that was in Far Cry 4 and, the majority of Assassin's Creed games that they've released. Pretty much the majority of their open world games, there's a collectathon mentality. It's not until just recently that they've gone through and just gotten rid of those elements. And so that makes it so you as the player end up focusing more on what the actual content is. That's important, be it story missions or side missions or, some type of mini game or whatever the case. And so that's a huge improvement. Outside of those two things, Far Cry 5 is a very mundane experience. It's by the numbers. The shooting is basically the same from Far Cry 4. The driving, not control-wise, but mechanics-wise, is basically the same as it was in Far Cry 4. And there's really not much of anything that they added that's new here. One of the main things they did do was turn this game into a co-op experience, an optional co-op experience. And so you can have another player drop in and play the game alongside you. Or you can, if you're just wanting to play the game single player, you can summon these AI co-op partners, basically, and play the game with a partner, played by the CPU. The problem with that is this game came out in 2018, and the AI is still some of the worst I've ever seen in a video game. It's like they didn't give enough of a shit to actually try and bother putting in, AI that actually respects the player's intelligence and their time. Because quite often in this game, the AI, who isn't completely useless, the AI will get kills and be helpful in certain situations, but for the most part, the AI just does things that you don't want them to do, and you have very little control over them. And like many other video games where, AI co-op partners are a thing, you have very little control over them. Now, it's not as bad as, say, something like Gears 5, where the AI is just so fucking stupid that they're not helpful whatsoever on any level. It's not that bad, but it's still not really a highlight in this game. The co-op element really is only useful if you're planning on playing with another person. And so I took that into consideration during my playthrough. Also, the setting in this game, which is one of the main reasons why I didn't have any interest to play this for the longest time. The setting is just boring. It's this middle America small town known as Hope County. and it's just the same usual bullshit of, you have mountains here and there. You have these gas stations that are just randomly scattered in the environment. You have these large open fields, and you have these wide riverbanks that just stretch on and on and on for miles. And it's the same as all the other Far Cry games, but it doesn't have the uncanny nature to it. It doesn't have the interesting wildlife, simply because it's a little bit too modern and on the nose. And it seems that they didn't really come up with an interesting setting for this game compared to the other Far Cry games that came before. Another thing that really brought this game down is the gunplay. The gunplay in this fucking game is awful. It's terrible. Specifically when it comes to aiming. If you try and just go hands on and actually free the controls up and try and aim your weapon at whatever target you're trying to shoot at in this game, regardless of the weapon that you're trying to use, unless you're at a very close range, it's extremely difficult to actually land a shot when you're just aiming freely. And that's a big problem. The way the gunplay works in this game, and I believe it also worked the same way in Far Cry 4, is that you have to quickly tap the aim button, and then the game will automatically aim at the target that you're trying to shoot at. And it'll last a few seconds, basically, before you have to do it again. And you can just pop off shots that way. And so the gunplay is pretty weak in this. There's not enough precise control with it for it to be satisfying on a gameplay level. And it only adds to the mindless repetition that the game is filled with, which leads me into my next issue. And this was also an issue in Far Cry 4. It's an issue in virtually every single game that Ubisoft releases these days, and that is the fact that outside of the main story, the side missions and the side activities that you can do in the game are extremely repetitive because essentially the game is filled with a handful of different activities, and those activities are just multiplied throughout the game's environment at random. And this is Ubisoft's way of trying to force content into the game to pad out the experience. And that's just lazy, for one. And for two, it's like, we should be past games like this. That style of game design is well over a decade old at this point. And it's one of the main reasons why I'm just losing interest in open world games. Because game developers simply do not know, most of them, do not know how to fill a game world with enough meaningful content that doesn't feel repetitive and oversaturated to the point where the game just becomes a mindless, repetitive slog, which is what this game is. The core gameplay loop is good. The problem is there's no depth that's there. There's no depth that's there with the gameplay. As far as the shooting, there's no depth that's there with the exploration. And the main reason for that is because this is a sequel. This is the fifth entry of a series that's years and years old at this point, and they haven't done enough to actually make it feel fresh and exciting as Far Cry once was. And so this game suffers from a lot of the same fatigue elements with the open world game design that you find in a lot of modern video games now. But what can offset this is having a great story. If you have a great story, a good story, well-written narrative with interesting, likable characters, then you can forgive the weak elements of the gameplay. Except you can't with this game because the story is fucking god-awful in this game. It's terrible. Basically, the story of Far Cry 5 is this. You have some kind of religious cult, a group of zealots led by a man named Joseph Seed. And Joseph Seed and his followers are basically this game's version of the Manson family, and they have taken over an entire town. The premise of that doesn't really make any sense, for one, because where are the police? Where's the military? Where's the National Guard? Where's the FBI? The CIA? And so the game doesn't have a realistic premise in the first place, which actually hurts the narrative and just completely makes it unbelievable. But what really makes it worse is the fact that the narrative isn't even good. So you have the main boss, Joseph Seed, who is the head guy running this cult. And then he has three basically acolytes, three followers, these horseman type characters. One is Faith Seed, the other is John Seed, and I forget the name of the last one. These three characters have basically three different regions that make up all of Hope County. They've taken over one specific region. It's your goal as the player to complete story missions and the complete side missions and side activities in order to build up a meter known as resistance points. And you continue playing the game in each region, which has its own specific resistance meter. And if you fill up this meter all the way, then the game allows you access to the boss in that region. Only after you defeat all three bosses can you now face Joseph Seed and basically beat the game. Now, I didn't really have an issue with how Ubisoft designed this because the resistance meter actually fills pretty quickly. This game actually isn't very long at all. It's like around 15 to 20 hours max just for the story alone, and then you have a bunch of side content after the game is over. And you have New Game Plus. Here's the real problem though. The story for all three of these characters, Faith, John, and some other character, again, I forget the name of the character, but these three characters don't really have an interesting backstory. Faith, for example, is presented as some kind of victim where she was essentially recruited by Joseph Seed at the age of 17 and basically forced to adopt his belief system as a Christian, a hardcore Christian who just happens to be a madman. The backstory for these three characters is very weak. And because they're very weak, you really don't care when you actually take one of them out. And everything you do in the game is meant to lead up to a meeting with one of these three characters, a showdown, leading all the way to the end with Joseph Seed himself. And it's a problem if the player doesn't actually give a shit about what they're doing. But that's not even the worst part about this game's story. The worst part is actually when you defeat all three characters and you actually come face to face with Joseph Seed at the end of the game. Because what essentially happens, what takes place, is some of the worst storytelling I've ever seen in a video game. Across any genre, from any development studio or publisher, this game has one of the worst endings I've ever seen. If I made a top 10 worst narrative list for video games, Far Cry 5 would be up on that list simply because the ending is nihilistic. It really doesn't have a point, and it just seems completely random, and it invalidates pretty much everything the player does throughout the entire game. And so you have a split decision at the end of this game. Joseph Seed gives you a choice. The choice is simple. Either the player can leave Hope County with the people that are from Hope County that you save throughout the game, such as the sheriff and some of the other deputies that are in the area or were in the area before Joseph Seed and his followers arrived to basically wreak havoc. Or you can try and take Joseph Seed down and kill him. If you make that decision, Joseph Seed basically drugs you, and you're put in this strange boss fight where you have to revive all of your allies while taking on what appears to be Joseph Seed as in the form of a hallucination. Now you play this battle and you win. Then the people of Hope County, which includes the sheriff, the nameless deputy that the player is playing as, because your character doesn't speak throughout the entire game, doesn't have a personality or really any type of defined identity like the past protagonist in the older Far Cry games, and that just adds to how dumb the story actually is. But the epilogue, when you get to it, Joseph Seed is apprehended, but before they can take him away, he activates some kind of bomb, like an atomic bomb. How he got access to an atomic bomb is not explained whatsoever. It's just something random that happens in the story, and it really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But he activates some kind of bomb the bomb is going to destroy Hope County. When you see the atmospheric cloud that it produces, it basically destroys everything. And you're put into this sequence where the heroes of the game are basically trying to escape in this van, but the explosion or the debris of the explosion catches up to them, and it kills everyone inside except for Joseph Seed and the deputy, which is the player character. And then you're dragged by Joseph Seed into this bunker where he basically explains that he's pissed off that you killed all his followers, but now states that the way you're going to make up for it is you're going to be his new family. And he basically kidnaps the player character and forces them to be his slave. And that's the end of the game. They literally ended it on that note. And it's one of the most nihilistic, just negative for the sake of being negative, fruitless, tasteless ending that just makes you wonder why you even bothered playing the game in the first place. Because all of it was leading up to this point. And Ubisoft, I think most people genuinely hated the ending to this game, and that's why Ubisoft went back and decided to make a follow-up to Far Cry 5 with Far Cry New Dawn, which takes place 17 years later, and basically has not much of anything to do with the events of Far Cry 5. That just goes to show how much they fucked up the ending of this game. Because New Dawn takes place after the atomic bomb that goes off in Hope County at the end of Far Cry 5. And Joseph Seed's not even the main villain of that game. They replaced him with two twin characters or whatever who have taken over the region. The story is just, it's one of the most poorly written narratives I've ever seen in a video game. It's easily top 10 worst narratives of the 8th generation alone. And it makes it so you don't even really want to replay the game, via New Game Plus, which is an option that's available because the story is just that bad. You don't care about any of the bosses because they're underwritten, and you don't care about the narrative as a whole once you get to the end of the game because regardless of your actions, Joseph Seed wins. The villain wins, and there's nothing that you can really do about it. And it's just god awful. I don't know what the hell they were thinking. The ending is up there with Mass Effect 3 for, one of the worst endings of all time in the medium of video games. Really, all you have left is the gameplay, and as I explained earlier, the gameplay is weak, and there's not much depth to it whatsoever. And it's filled with a bunch of repetition that Ubisoft games are known for, mindless repetition that just gets old after hour 10, but stretches on to hour 30, hour 40, hour 50, so on and so forth, if you're a completionist like me and you want to try and do everything there is to do in a game. But there's just no point in even bothering to do that with a game like Far Cry 5 when the goddamn narrative isn't even good. So, all in all, this was a very weak release by Ubisoft. This game was all over the place with its review scores. You have stupid motherfuckers at IGN and GameSpot that gave this game like 9 out of 10s. And I really don't get that at all when you look at the game for what it is, both in its content, its story, the way it plays, all of that shit. And easily, the older games were better, even though they were filled with a bunch of collectathon bullshit. The older games had a lot more to offer when it comes to quality. And quality will always be more important than quantity. This game wisely removed the quantity of all the meandering around and collecting these pointless trinkets to pad out the game time. And that was a great improvement that Ubisoft made with this game. But at the same time, everything around that is just weak. The gameplay is mediocre. The gunplay is unsatisfying. The side quests and the side activities are repetitive as hell. The game still relies heavily on boring side activities such as hunting in order for the player to get a large sum of money outside of, collecting these stashes that are just hidden throughout the world. The story is god awful. I have no idea what the hell they were thinking when they green-lighted that script for this game because it really is that bad. And there's no reason to go back and play this game again once you finish it unless you're just a completionist and you want to get all the trophies or achievements, whatever the case. It's no surprise that it took me a long time to have any sort of investment into this game to have enough interest to complete it. As soon as they revealed, I remember when they revealed the initial debut trailer for Far Cry 5, and I looked at it and I was like, what the fuck is this? How you go from Kyrat, or whatever it was in Far Cry 4, to this Hope County, Montana bullshit in Far Cry 5? And then after actually playing the game myself and seeing what they did with the story and the characters, I'm like, man, this is some bullshit. So that's Far Cry 5. Easily, it's one of the weakest games I've played all generation. Yeah, I don't really have any hope for Far Cry 6. There's already some red flags with that game because you play as a nameless nobody again. Then they have like a puppy that follows you around the entire game or some shit, or that I guess that's one of the companion characters or whatever. And it just seems like a cheap way to market the game to get idiots to spend money on Ubisoft's repetitive gameplay loop that they keep rehashing every single time they announce one of these stupid Far Cry games. So it's weird to me. I really don't understand it. Is the game bad? No. It's just this is a big major franchise, and I know Ubisoft is capable of doing better than this. The game is weak. Is it bad? No. But it's weak still. So that's what I got to say about Far Cry 5. I'll probably play Far Cry New Dawn and see what they did with that. But regardless of whatever they did with New Dawn, it doesn't make up for the bullshit story that became Far Cry 5. So yeah, I really don't have any interest in Far Cry 6 at the moment. I'll probably end up playing it anyway because I haven't actually like officially quit the franchise like I have Assassin's Creed. I'll just have to see how that one turns out. Far Cry 6 is definitely not a day one purchase, like whatsoever. This game wasn't a day one purchase for me. So anyway, right now I am going through a small list of games that I skipped or that I missed this past generation before the next generation arrives. Right now, clearly the last major game that's going to come out this generation is Cyberpunk 2077. I still consider that to be an 8th generation game, considering it was announced years ago, and considering it's only being released on the Xbox One and the PlayStation 4. Even though you can play it on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X, it's not a 9th generation game. I think Far Cry 6 is going to be the first major next gen game that's a new release, because I don't consider a remake of Demon's Souls, a game that's 10 years old, to be a next generation game. I don't consider Spider-Man Miles Morales an expansion to a game that came out 2 years ago to be a next generation, like a new generation game. The list of games that I intend to go through, the ones that I missed, are Vampire, Alien Isolation, Outlast 2. I haven't played any of the Outlast games, and Dying Light. Most of those games I have on PC. In fact, all those games I only own on PC except for Outlast 2. I own that on console, on PlayStation 4. And after those, that's really it for me. It's just those games and Watch Dogs Legion and Cyberpunk 2077. And after I complete those games, that will be the end of the 8th generation for me. And then I'll probably make a top 10 list of best games from the 8th generation, just wrapping it up and basically giving not necessarily a review, but a overall opinion and stance of what actually happened with video games in the 8th generation and what I think needs to improve with the medium, what can be done better for the 9th generation, and if there's even any hope for the 9th generation, because video games in the 8th generation have just fallen in quality by a wide margin. So those are the next retrospectives I will be focusing on.
The world as we know it is over.